you so much. Thank you so much for being here today. We're so excited to kind of kick off the year. We started a couple of years ago, or a couple of weeks ago, and we can't wait to get started.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be the first honorary guest, actually. So, and hopefully there'll be a ton of questions. So feel free to ask me anything. I'll do my best at giving you some perspectives. But yeah, really, really looking forward to the session.
Perfect. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So you started your career in sales, which I've always admired, as I started my career in sales as well. So I wanted to hear a little bit about, what led you to start your career there, and would you recommend it for MBA graduates?
Yeah, it's a great question. I accidentally stepped into sales. I better confess. So I was doing an honours thesis at university, and just like here at the colleges, there were employers that were coming on campus, so you could cheat and bring a suit and have interviews on campus. And one of the companies that offered me a job when I was graduating was IBM. And one of the things that attracted me to them when I went through the process, they were the largest technology company in the world at the time. They had over 400,000 employees. And their entire pitch was really around solving customers' problems. And even today, they really haven't deviated from that messaging over the decades. And I loved problem solving. That's what I love to do. And when I went through the process, I thought, wow, this is a really interesting, diverse set of experiences that they offer. And so when I applied, their graduate program was a 12-month program where you basically were given an opportunity to touch all parts of the business. And so they sort of had a technology thread, which was really much more sort of computer science, engineering oriented. And then they had sort of a more general group, which was really learning about sales and marketing and operations and everything that was very customer centric. And so you went through both, and at the end they sort of assessed you and they said, hey, we think you're more akin to this than you are to that. And they thought, well, we think you'd make a good seller. At the time, I didn't really know what a salesperson was. Quite frankly, I just written an honours thesis in third world economics. But I thought this could be fun. And it turned out to be a fantastic crash course in business. And I think one of the things that in hindsight, or as I look back, that I really loved is the idea of carrying a bag is somewhat daunting. I will absolutely say that. I remember my first year, it was terrifying. I was like nervous walking into every building and every office thinking, oh my gosh, do I have something to talk to this customer about? But you start to learn so much about sort of individual customers and then their industries and the broader marketplace. And I can't think of another industry like tech and tech sales that actually affords you those opportunities. And so for me, it was highly advantageous. And now being a chief operating officer, as I speak to my peers, there are a whole bunch of amazing people, especially women here in the Silicon Valley, who are in these COO roles. Susan Ledger, Erica over at Confluent, all of us carry bags. And I think, it really sets you up very well in terms of a variety of skills. So, listening, negotiating, understanding business, just the breadth that you have to know sort of across an organization. Resiliency, you're going to fail and you're going to learn from the failures and you pick yourself up. And I just feel like it's just an incredibly broad lens on an organization, because you end up touching multiple functions. So I personally believe that starting in sales allows you to leapfrog into a variety of areas, and that is just a really solid foundation. As I said, it was accidental for me as well, but in the end, you're always selling in any job, if you ask me. And it's really about helping solve for problems. So is there a way for me to allow you to achieve your outcomes? And let's work together and figure out how we do that. So I think it's a fantastic training ground for any career and in any industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also accidentally found myself in sales, and I talk about it with, I look fondly on it because I learned just so much. So I understand, what drew you to sales and what drew you to the technology industry, but then you pivoted and you got into the operational side. So, what kind of made you make that transition, and what do you think contributed to your success?
So I had the the great opportunity of working for a really large company from the get-go. And one of the advantages of doing that is if you work hard and you're good at what you do and you want more opportunities, then in a really large organization like at IBM when I started, if you were successful, they sort of moved you every couple of years to try the next thing. They wanted to continue the development and career growth for you. They really had a phenomenal world-class program around that. And so I really quickly, A, became a utility player, but B, became very interested in what I call the engine room. And so even though I started in sales and I did a variety of different sales roles, I then moved sort of into operations, then product, then consulting, a stint in outsourcing. So I ended up doing a variety of things. Getting into the operational side really gave me a better understanding of just how the sausage was made. And I wanted to understand it at a very deep level. I also personally I've always believed that I'd like to say that I had done the jobs that you've done. And so I wanted people to know, look, I did the same thing. I swept the floors just like you did at one point. I took the calls at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, I brought the pizza out to the data center guys, you know, at 2 a.m. when the mainframes fell over. And so for me, I personally wanted to understand the inner workings of the business. And what better way to do that than in a really large organization where there's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of systems, a lot of processes. And so I had that terrific opportunity. Interestingly enough, as I mentor people now, both at Box and at other companies and startups, one of the really nice things about the startup world, as it turns out, the last decade, is that, again, if you want to, and you're talented, and you work hard, and you seek out the opportunities, there are so many of them, because as startups, we grow so quickly that you're always making investments in new parts of the organization. And so even now, I'm mentoring some folks who have literally sort of moved from one part of the business to another within 2 years, and then 2 years later, another. The scale of the opportunities, I think, accelerate much more quickly now as a result of just the startups really trying to get an edge on each other. And so there's a ton of opportunity. And if you want to, you can get into the nitty gritty at a company like Box really quickly, if that's something that you choose to do, because it's relatively flat. So the startups have the advantage of being relatively flat. So you can learn a cross-functional nature of the business really quickly. In the larger organizations, they tend to have really established career paths and sort of development programs. But at the same time, if you want to sort of weave your way into there, like I did, you have this opportunity to sort of become a pretty good utility sort of executive, which is ultimately, in my first 14 years, that's really where I landed. By the time I had exited IBM, I had literally covered sales, operations, customer success, marketing, product, software, consulting, and outsourcing. So literally every part of an organization. And it then allowed me to think, I'm not a marketing person, so I'm never going to go down a marketing path. So I very quickly eliminated things that I just wasn't that interested in. But then I honed in on the areas that I loved. And so it just gave me that really broad lens.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think probably resonates with a lot of us because, in getting our MBA, we are learning, all of those different business. And I won't speak for everybody, but, I personally am not 100% positive when I do what I want to do. Yeah. I do know that I don't want to do the same thing throughout the whole career. You want to kind of make changes, see what you like, see what you're best at, and really becoming what, like you said, the utility executive. So that sounds great. So did you take a pause from working in big tech to advise and then go back and then go to Box? Is that
it was driven by a personal situation. My dad got sick and I wanted to get back to Australia, and I just couldn't run. So when I was at Apple, the education business that I ran internationally was about an $8 billion business. So it was huge and it was all consuming. I spent, honestly, over those 4.5 years, I probably spent 150 days on the road every year visiting both K-12 schools as well as colleges and universities. It was just all consuming. And so for me, it was an easier decision to just step down and go home. So I actually ended up going back to Australia to look after Dad for a period of time. And then whilst I was there, I was approached by a couple of startups at home who had heard about me. And so I started advising them. It was really easy to do that without dedicating too much time. And I realized I loved it. I enjoyed it. And when I got back, I ended up doing some advising in a food tech business, but then ended up advising a couple of kids who are no longer kids out of Stanford, PhD students who created an incredible business. So I've got 3 advisory roles that I've now had for about 5 years in these smaller, and they're now not so small. They're about 300 to 400 employees each. But when we started, they were like 5 to 20 employees. And so I've been doing that, which allows me to take everything that I've learned about scaling and help them think about how do you sort of build a go-to-market model, and what does the business model look like, and how do you think about routes to market, and who your target market is, and segmentation, and then all the way through to raising money. So I used to partner the founders on sort of calls to venture capitalists. So sort of as their protector a little bit, but making sure we ask all the right questions as we do our due diligence. And so I really sort of covered the gamut all the way to, I was on calls with 2 of the founders this weekend from both companies who are looking at making some C-suite hires. So I help them review all the profiles, and we have a look at them, and then we set a criteria. So really sort of I'm helping with anything that they need help with that I think I can, bring to the table. That's kind of what I'm doing. And then I'm doing a big sort of company advisory role, which is sort of accidental, but something I fell into. So I'm on the Global Advisory Council for Standard Chartered Bank internationally, and they use an advisory council as a think tank. So they've got their board, obviously, but this advisory council is made up of a diverse set of individuals from across the globe and different industries. And there's 2 of us in tech, myself and the country manager for Salesforce in India, who used to run the largest bank in the world in India. And we bring a particular level of thought leadership. And then we also have an opportunity to mentor. So I mentor a group of women in Kenya as part of the program, and a whole bunch of fun things. But then the beautiful thing about it is I get to balance sort of advising the startups, and then at the same time looking at a massive organization like Standard Chartered Bank and thinking about ways to drive sort of either a more efficient way of doing business, a way to scale and reach in emerging markets, the way they think about sort of their culture, which is vastly different when you have tens and tens of thousands of employees. And so I have an opportunity to sort of have a foot in both camps and look at all the different things that I believe they might be able to learn from in terms of what's happening here in the Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense why you are heading the international programs with Box, because of, the passion for it, the experience. So speaking of Box, after you took some time off, even though I would put it in quotes because, it sounds like you were very busy. I'm sure you took your time to really find the right company that was going to be your next step and something that fit with you, that you believed in. What, as much as Box picked you, you picked Box. What made you pick Box?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to meet Aaron Levy, who you know, and who's a pretty remarkable individual. And I'm really selective about the companies that I work for from a core values and leadership perspective. And that was one of the incredible things about, working at Apple and working for someone like Tim, or working at Cisco and working for John Chambers. Like, these are really remarkable human beings. Forget about the fact that they're great business people. They're just really, really, really good people who genuinely care about their people, the community at large, and doing great things in the world. And so I definitely want to work for an organization where I would take, I jokingly have said to Aaron's mother, like, I'd take a bullet for him, and I probably would. I mean, that's how I feel about the work that he does. And so, I assess for all the typical business things, although one of the things I was really interested in was innovation. And so having worked at both Cisco and Apple, who really drove large-scale innovation, it was really interesting to find out more about the type of innovation and technology that could fundamentally either disrupt or change the way we did things. And there was something about the innovation that, Aaron had in his head since he was like 15 years old, that I thought, wow, this is incredible. If we can pull this off, this would be kind of fun. And so it's sort of a combination of the innovation, the culture and leadership, and then quite frankly, and he wouldn't mind if I said this, there were some fundamental foundational things that didn't exist at the startup yet. It's like, okay, you guys don't have a process for that? Okay. So it's like, and so there was stuff that I just knew I could just do. I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm really good at some of this stuff. It's in my bones. It's like what I do for a living. So I knew that I could come in pretty quickly and help sort of address some of what I would call rudimentary underlying business processes. They had a business model, but unless you had the operational parts that sort of slot in and allows you to reach and scale, then you're never going to grow to $1 billion. And that's sort of what I said to Aaron. And I said to him, look, I don't know how long this is going to take me. I was estimating 4 years at $1 billion, and we're just shy of $1 billion, and I'm at 4 years. So I think it's going to be more like 5 years at $1 billion. But we now have a really, really robust set of processes and tools and systems and a really strong foundation that you can build upon. And I just thought, it would be fun. I knew I had a set of skills that I could contribute to immediately. And then I had an opportunity to learn about a new sort of innovative way of thinking about things. And they were just incredible people. And so it sort of ticked all the boxes.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And I remember when you came and we started feeling all of these changes, even on someone who graduated college 2 years ago. And it was really, there were growing pains, but we got so much more efficient, and it just changed how we did things.
Yeah.
My favorite part about working at Box was the culture. And so this is kind of maybe a little bit of a selfish question. So I was actually one of the chief fun officers for the Austin office. And my question for you is, what is your favorite Box value?
Without a doubt, Make Mum Proud is my favorite. And I nearly wore my Make Mum Proud t-shirt today, but I thought that might be a bit too much, so I didn't put it on. But it is for me, and it's funny, our head of engineering is an incredible Frenchman, Thierry, and we both actually believe that it's one of the most amazing core values. And it may not be your mum, it could be your dad, or it could be, your aunt, or it could be, you can sort of fill in that mum if you needed to. But for me personally, Make Mum Proud is everything that I've always believed in. My parents have been my biggest inspirations, and they've worked so hard for me. And in return, the least, I've always wanted to make them proud. And there's a funny story. I'm a bit of a sports nut, one of the people who I've always admired, which probably many of you won't know, but I'll say anyway, there was an incredible rugby union player in the UK. His name is Johnny Wilkinson. You can look him up. Great human being, really special individual. And he wrote a book years ago where he always talked about he wanted to never be tomorrow's headline in a bad way. And his parents had always said to him, don't ever be tomorrow's headline. And it was kind of funny. It always sort of sat with me because for me, making mum and dad proud was always a thing that I wanted to do most in the world. And I always say, you can forget the numbers, you can forget the money making, forget the titles, but at the end of the day, the emails that I still continue to get, or the messages that I get from folks, just random messages that I continue to get from people. And having social platforms like LinkedIn sort of does this now, where people say, you may not remember me, Stephanie, but many years ago, I worked in your organization and I still remember you doing X, Y, Z. Every time I get that, I always think to myself, that's what makes it worthwhile. Knowing that you had a small positive impact on someone's life in some shape or form makes all the hard work worthwhile. And so I think for me, making the people that you care about the most proud is kind of what we should probably all aspire for.
Mm-hmm. And then you forward the email off to your parents and say, what I did.
Yeah, no, it's a great core value. It really is.
It is. It's definitely my favorite. That or get shit done. That was a good
one. Yeah, that's a good one too.
We use that one a lot in the sales org.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, obviously tech is such a wonderful place to work. I've loved working in the industry. A lot of the people here on the call, they came from different backgrounds and they want to get into tech. So what is your advice for MBA students looking into getting into tech, maybe specifically sales and operations, but really any advice that you have about tech?
Happy to help. I've just actually been working with 3 MBA students that they all happen to be children of friends of mine who are looking for advice. One just graduated from Northwestern, and there's a few others. And I actually help them think through everything from in the industry, is there something really specific that you're interested in, or is it more general? So for example, one of the hottest areas in tech right now, it just is business analytics, all things analytics, and machine learning and business intelligence. And only because the data is so critical now, there is just so much of it. Figuring out how to mine the data, what does it mean, and then how does it inform your next decision or recommendation, etc., is really important. So that happens to be a really, really hot area right now. None of us can get enough of those folks. Engineering is the same. And so when I was going through this process with these 3 young people, I was trying to sort of help them figure out, are you looking for something more broad or something more narrow? And then, interestingly enough, I mean, most, if not all, of the tech companies here in the Silicon Valley post every role. The only roles they're not posting is literally VP and above, but maybe senior director, but everything below senior director is posted, and everyone is posting them. So you can literally, if you haven't figured out how to use the filters on LinkedIn, there's a lot you can do, and you can really quickly sort of hone in on the things that you like. There are so many jobs, and I'm finding that a lot of the tech companies here now are introducing roles, entry-level roles that are much broader in nature, so that they can slot you into different parts of the business. We're doing the same things now. So we just picked up 25 interns for next year. So they will have graduated, they've interned, and we're going to put them into 3 or 4 different areas based on kind of what we observed and what they liked. Mm-hmm. So most of the tech companies, we're all doing that now. And then we're posting for a bunch of sort of introductory or associate roles across everything. So everything from associate SEs, entry-level sales job, entry-level sort of BA roles. The other really fun job that I would highly recommend you look for is the chief of staff. Most tech companies have a chief of staff role like we do, which is really a phenomenal opportunity for you to be in seat for, call it 18 to 24 months. All of our chief of staffs usually are MBA grads, maybe a year out, maybe straight out of school, and they get to just have visibility of the entire organization. They get exposure to the C-suite and E-staff as part of their roles. They know that they get to look for new opportunities. Like the idea of the chief of staff role at Box, and I know Okta does a similar thing, I think Confluent uses it in the same way, is you get to, as you're doing the work for, let's say, me or for Aaron, you also get to very quickly identify areas in the business that you love. It's like, wow, I'd really be interested in that. And so as I think of our chief of staff roles, Aaron's current chief of staff is about to go to product after her stint finishes. His prior chief of staff role runs our renewal business globally. The prior chief of staff role ended up picking up a big chunk of our customer success organization. And they were able to identify areas that they really were interested in as part of doing work for one of the C-suite members. And so the chief of staff role is I think personally, if I had to do my time again, I would do a chief of staff role. It's just the fastest way in a tech company, particularly small to mid-sized, to get really, really into sort of the fun, hard workings of an organization. Look, I have to confess, they're hard jobs because you kind of work crazy hours, because if I need you to help me at 11 o'clock at night, I kind of want you to be there. But they're really fun jobs. So I really think tech is a great industry. The only other industry or area that I can think of that offers as much sort of breadth or diversity is probably management consultant. But the one thing that I personally find, and I've got tons of great friends who work at all the management consulting firms, it's project based. So you only get to stay with the client, and they are a client, so you're not embedded in the organization. You do get to provide some level of support, so to speak, as you're making a recommendation. Sometimes you get to implement, most of the times you don't. and then you move to the next one. So although you get breadth, and diversity, you won't necessarily get as much depth as if you were in the business, but it's probably the only other industry segment that I can think of that gives you that breadth. Technology just allows you to touch everything out there, and so you can sort of navigate your career based on the fact that you've had an opportunity to see so much.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense, and I've written down chief of staff for when
fantastic
call.
Awesome.
Yep. So you've helped one person. So I know a lot of us think about, 5 years, 10 years down the line, really being those execs in these organizations, and, getting a sneak peek of what that looks like is always helpful and kind of what's coming. So what has been, this is kind of a fun question. What has been, the most frustrating or the scariest or the most intimidating experience, that you've had as a leader, where you were like, oh shit, maybe I'm not sure how to tackle this, or this didn't happen the way I thought it was going to?
Yeah, probably the most terrifying was I was given an opportunity to run an engineering organization in Japan, based in Tokyo, because I spent a lot of time living and working in Asia. And so I spent time, I did a stint in Singapore, a stint in Shanghai, and a stint in Tokyo. And I was running a 3,000 person engineering group in Tokyo, which was terrifying. A, the majority of them didn't speak any English. B, I'm not super technical by nature. Like, I know enough to be dangerous, but but they were looking for a strong leader to sort of transform some of that business. And although I learned a lot, it was definitely the scariest job and probably not the best fit. I did perfectly fine because I never do anything by halves. So they would say that I did a good job. They may even say I did a great job. But after 18 months, I made the decision that this was not a path that I wanted sort of my career to head down. And so I remember being terrified going in to see the head of Asia Pac, I can still picture him, Kidashiro-san, and just saying, look, I really appreciated this opportunity, but I really don't think this is the path that I want to continue with. I really want to go back to being very customer centric. And to their credit, they were fantastic, and they allowed me to sort of steer my way back. From there, I went into consulting. It was, look, there's a silver lining to every role, even the ones that you don't necessarily like, or the hardest ones. And I definitely learned a ton, as well as 75 words in Japanese that got me through a crash course in the Japanese language. But it was definitely pretty terrifying. And as I look back on it, it was a really great learning opportunity. But it also very clearly for me made me realize this wasn't a path that I wanted to take.
And I think realizing that that's okay, and that you can kind of, make your own path on what you want is really
Correct.
important, as we set out, right? That we're not, forced to do anything that's
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I have one more question for you. But before I do, everybody submit your questions, because then I'm going to transfer it over to Joseph to ask all of Steph your burning questions.
Perfect.
So the last one, with all of the knowledge you have now, except for doing chief of staff and said, what would you have told your younger self starting your career?
I think I would have told myself that failure is not really what the word means. Look, you're going to make mistakes along the way. And I think as you're building a career, and I was definitely someone that I'm a type A, I want to do well, I wanted to progress, and I still do. It's just the way I'm wired. But I think as my younger self, I was always so worried about making the mistake. And if I made the mistake, what would people think? And would it slow me down? And I'm a failure. And that is not the case at all. Honestly, it makes you better and stronger. It's character building. You become resilient. You learn from it. And you won't make the mistake again. You ask yourself, what could I have done differently for the next time? And so I really feel like, and it's so much easier said than done. As a 20-something-year-old or 30-something-year-old, you're kind of terrified because you're gunning for the next role. And so you're thinking, have I just limited my opportunities because of the mistake, or I wasn't as successful as I thought? And that is definitely not the case. I truly believe that you can write your own journey. You absolutely can. And my parents always said to me, they've always said to me, life is a series of T intersections. You can either go left or go right. And if you go left and if you don't like it, turn around and go the other way. And quite frankly, it was great advice because even when things didn't quite turn out as I had hoped or wanted, it still didn't stop me from moving forward in some shape or form and eventually landing in places that I loved. And so that's probably the advice that I would give myself today. I think you're incredibly lucky, all of you, because when I was your age, I did not have just the scale and breadth of opportunities. There's no doubt the internet changed everything. It opened up an entire world of opportunities globally. I mean, I had to live offshore for 10 years in order to get a global experience. That's what I had to do. And then I moved here, quite frankly. Again, I was supposed to be here for 2 years because I wanted another global experience. And it's been 15 now. And I haven't, I've loved it. I wouldn't change a thing about it. But honestly, when you're in Australia, which is a pretty long way from just about anywhere, getting a global opportunity, prior to the internet, you had to jump on a plane and either spend, months of your life flying, or you had to move yourself offshore. Now, living in another part of the world, if you ever get an opportunity to do so for work, I would highly encourage it. It's some of the most rewarding periods of my life. But the world has become truly, truly global. And so you can take advantage of so many opportunities and you can change your mind whenever you want to. So I would be really open to anything that comes your way and try it. What's the worst thing that can happen, as my parents always said. So that's probably the advice I would give.
Well, thank you so much. I know your stories and your advice, they've been so helpful to me and so helpful to everybody else. But I know we have some more questions for you.
Cool.
So I'm going to go off camera. Joe's just going to pop on and kind of moderate the questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Bye.
Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, Joseph.
Oh, we have some feedback. 1 second. We will, wait.
I'm back.
You're back. We have a few feedback issues.
Technical difficulties. So I will be asking the questions.
Perfect. So good.
Some more time with me. Okay, let me pop them up real quick. Okay, so the first question here is, how can young companies find advisors like yourself for their business, and how important do you think they are?
So there are a few formal ways to do this. So you can work through, so here in the Valley Y Incubator, there's a whole bunch of sort of organizations that do that. And what they do is, on their side, they recruit people like us. So I get pinged from them all the time saying, hey, pre-pandemic, they'd say, hey, Steph, we've got an evening where we've got 40 entrepreneurs coming in. Would you be open to coming and doing a Q&A? And I'd always say, yes, I love doing it. And so you can do it through a bunch of those channels. There's also, actually, and I'll find it and send it to you afterwards, Amanda, two of my C-suite, so my CMO, Chris Kohler, and my CRO, Mark Wayland, are both part of two different organizations that actually provide pro bono kind of advisory work. And there are lots of them. They're part of two very large ones that I only heard about in the last year or so. They're fantastic. And all you do is you go through a process of applying. It's really straightforward. So I'll send you some links for those so you know who they are. So I would just look for them. Every city has them. I have spoken at one in New York. I've spoken at two in Boston, one in Philly. I do the ones here in the Silicon Valley a lot. And I just get pinged to speak at a lot of these group sort of sessions that they run. So I'll do my best at putting a whole list of them together and just emailing you, Amanda, and then you can just share it with the whole group.
Yes.
But there's lots of formal routes. Informally, honestly, that it happens that the 3 that I advise today all found me through a broad network, and they had heard about me. And I get a call from a buddy in Australia for one of them saying, hey, would you meet the folks at campus on Stanford? I met them. I fell in love with them. I thought they were the smartest, most humble people I'd ever met, and I just wanted to help them. And they've asked, would you help us on an ongoing basis? And I said, of course I would. So sometimes they find me, I have to confess, but there are lots of formal routes that I have sort of embedded myself in. So I'll send some of those your way so you can send them out.
Okay, that would be great. And we definitely will send them out.
Perfect.
This is a question from Matthew. So the question is, what traits do you think are most important for anyone aspiring to eventually land in a C-suite position at a large organization like Box?
There's probably a lot. I think there are some fundamental skills. Particularly the COO role in tech is a really interesting role. There was a phenomenal article written a couple of years ago in Fortune. I will send that one to Amanda as well. And it specifically talked about the role of the COO here. We tend to play sort of this sidekick role to a founder. And depending on the leaning of the organization, it might have a little more of a product management engineering bent or a little more of a go-to-market bent. Mine happens to have a go-to-market bent because of the nature of the founder. But for example, at a place like Stripe, Patrick's has more of an engineering bent because we're a very product-led organization. So it sort of varies depending on the company. And so depending on that lens, you will have, so to play this role, you kind of needed to have carried a bag. So Aaron would look for someone who has exposure across all the functions, but if you haven't carried a bag and you have, marketing and sort of customer success and operations, I'm not sure he's necessarily going to lean that way because of the importance of that piece of our go-to-market engine. Now, for other organizations, it may not be as important. So as you assess the companies that you decide you want to work for over time, and you start to fine-tune your strengths, then try and marry them. So because, for example, there are a set of organizations that continue to approach me over the years, either for board work or could you consider coming and being our COO? And I say, thanks, but no thanks. But interestingly enough, the majority of them have clearly not done their homework on me because some of these companies are so engineering or technology oriented that it's really not going to play to my strengths. And so I've been pretty mindful over the years, particularly the last 15 years. I have a document that I have updated myself on a regular basis that has me focusing in on the things that I think I'm really good at and how they sort of align to the opportunities as they arise. And so you would probably need to think about that. Obviously, there are all the core values that, you sort of hope to find in individuals, that they have an ability to be, collaborative and inclusive and take people on the journey. They're great listeners. They care deeply about doing what's best for their own individuals in their teams, their employees, the broader community, the customers at large. So there's sort of a whole bunch of different criteria that we look for. Having a really solid understanding of what's happening in the marketplace, because a lot of what comes with the COO role is context. And so one of the things that my peers and I always talk about is this concept of context switching. It's what we do constantly. We content switch and we context switch. So if I think about my day, like Aaron always gets a headache when he looks at my calendar, I could go from an HR call at 7:30 in the morning with Europe to a customer meeting at 9 o'clock to a churn review or a forecast review at 10:30 to a deep dive on FedRAMP high compliance for our government clients an hour later. And so you're constantly switching between roles and functions, and it's actually really hard to do without a lot of practice, as Malcolm Gladwell will tell you. And so the COO role is a role that encompasses sort of a combination of all of the sort of strengths and skills that you really build over a long period of time. Like the kit bag keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I'm still constantly learning new things that I can throw in that bag. But just to give you a little bit more about the role, there's a lot of context switching. And in order to do that pretty seamlessly, it's highly advantageous to being part of that function, or having done a similar role, or a role in that function at some point, because it just adds to the kit bag. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I especially think that for everyone on the call, I learned that not all tech is created equal when I was recruiting, because I would find roles that had the same title across the board, but one was, extremely more technical than another.
Yeah.
And you kind of think that, oh, I have this skill set I can apply to pretty much any tech company, but you actually have to think about, okay, what kind of work do I want to do, and what company has that work for me?
Correct.
So I think that it would have definitely helped me if I'd known that a little earlier, because, you can narrow down, which is really important. This is a question from Jordan, which is, can you share more about your experience working in Japan and any difficulties you might have experienced as a female in business there?
This great question. Let me start by saying I loved working in Asia. I spent the last 7 years of my IBM career running Asia Pacific teams, and so traveled all over the entire sort of map of Asia, but also ended up living in a few locations, which was a lot of fun. I love Japan, and I'd holidayed there. So there's something so magical about the country. It is a very unique culture. And so there are things that you definitely had to learn. As a female, I'm not going to lie, it was definitely challenging. And I was a young female, to make matters even worse, a young single female. And so it was one of the reasons why many companies like IBM would happily pay for you to do an immersion course in culture, and actually culture was mandatory, but language was optional. And so I took the optional language training for 9 months, and I still only had a vocabulary of about 75 words. However, it was enough to give me a little bit of credibility and an in. So for example, I could be in a meeting and they would be speaking in Japanese, and there were enough words that I actually had a sense of what they would say. And so I would then say something to them, and they would sort of freak out that they all of a sudden they realized, oh my gosh, I think she understood what we said. Yeah. And so it was helpful. There was no doubt. I think if I had not done that immersion program, it would have been a lot more difficult. I also consciously chose not to join there's an American club there, and there's a whole bunch of things. I really did genuinely want to immerse myself in the culture. So I lived in a part of Tokyo that had no expats. I chose to do that. I made Japanese friends. I happen to love Japanese food, so that wasn't a problem. But I learned origami. I did the tea ceremony course. I did, you name it. But for me, it was an adventure. I just loved it. Yep. Work was tough, but my background is Italian, working class, so I'm pretty tough. So I was pretty, there was some nights I get on the phone to Australia and cry to mum and dad occasionally. It's like, what am I doing here? But there were, we all have our moments, and then you take three deep breaths and you realize the sun's going to shine tomorrow. It's going to be all okay. But I loved it. It is culturally challenging, and I think living and working across Asia just made me much more thoughtful and inclusive and respectful of trying to put myself in other people's shoes. Even today with my Japan team, I take a particular approach to our review meetings when there is a tough recommendation coming forward, which I know is not going to get across the line. There is an approach that I take to ensure that they feel very, very heard, as opposed to you might be a little more dismissive. In this culture, it's like, no, don't even bother. It's not going to get through for approval, and this is why. We probably sort of accept a little easier. That's not going to work for Japan. You have to give them the time to take you through the detailed process that they went through and then find a way to explain to them that unfortunately this isn't the right time to be doing this. So you just learn very quickly for each culture. It's the same when I go to Europe. I mean, working in Germany is so different to working with the French. And so you just have to be very mindful as you're dealing with different nationalities and different ways of doing business to try and understand it before you arrive, before you get there. It's just, I think it's just the professional, courteous thing to do.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And probably a great learning experience.
Yeah.
So this next question here is from Matthew, and it is, what do you think that the cloud computing business will look like 10 to 15 years from now?
That's a great question, Matthew. Yes, I know. It's a great question. Interestingly enough, it's a question that the CEO of Standard Chartered Bank asks me all the time, because he's sort of saying, well, what are you hearing in the Silicon Valley? Like, and they're doing a lot of work. SC Ventures is their innovation venture arm based out of Singapore, and they're doing a ton of really interesting work to essentially leapfrog traditional sort of standard banking technology. I think there are a lot of things that are still a little too clunky with the cloud. And I can honestly say this because I'm a lot older than all you folks. And I would have thought 30 years ago, as I entered the tech industry and we could see what was coming, I would have hoped that by now, in all seriousness, that I wouldn't have to turn on my technology. I should be able to, well, just as I talk to Siri, but just I should be able to sit at my desk and immediately tell my computer what I need to do. It's still a little cumbersome. Technology has not evolved in some areas as fast as I would have liked. I think from a cloud perspective, the one thing that will happen, you will continue to see a consolidation of the major players because at scale, there are only so many people that can run the infrastructure. And so you're literally an Amazon, a Google and a Microsoft, maybe an IBM, but that's about it. So you're going to see this consolidation at sort of at the infrastructure level. It's going to get really, really cheap for all of us to do whatever we want, which is fantastic. That is one of the wonderful things about innovation and the trajectory that it's on. I do think that the platforms and the way we think about any of the things that we do in our day-to-day lives, even the area of banking, if I go back to that point, has definitely evolved tremendously in the last 10 years. And the fact that you can essentially do anything you want on this device at all times. And now with crypto, it sort of changes the game even entirely. All of this innovation that's kind of rushing our way in the medical field, the fact that they were able to develop a vaccine as fast as they did, for example, the innovation that underpins what they do scientifically. Technology is at the heart of what they're doing, and it's got to be powered by an incredible ecosystem and infrastructure. None of that would have been possible 5 years ago, I suspect. And so the rate of change is incredible, and we've come a long way. But I think sort of I've got little nieces and nephew, I always think about what is it going to be like for Thomas in 15 years time. The stuff that we think is cool right now is just going to be so outdated. So it can only get better and better. And hopefully the big thing is that it brings the world closer, because there still are the haves and the have-nots, and the technology was supposed to be an equalizer. It was supposed to democratize things. And I think we still have not done that in the emerging markets. And so I'm hopeful that the really major players in this industry will continue to think about ways to bring everyone and give everyone a voice. And I still think we've got some work to do there.
Mm-hmm. And at the very least, people will no longer be sending email attachments.
Yes.
And everything will be going through.
Thank you. I love that. Amanda's doing my own plug for me. Yes. Oh, yes. Let's hope so. Yeah.
Forever a salesperson.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So next question here has to do with your advising of startups. So at which point do you need to start worrying more about operations than product during while you're building a company?
Operations versus product, really good question. So the two startups that I'm helping, one of them's a learning management platform. So it sort of competes with the LinkedIn Learning or Lynda. And in actual fact, Microsoft Ventures has backed it. So that's that platform. The other platform is an emergency services platform for natural disasters like earthquakes. And so the governments are using it at the moment. In both instances, in the case of the emergency services platform, when I met those folks, and they were 4 employees, 3 PhD students and an associate, it was all about the product. And in actual fact, for the first 2 years before they even thought about having a beta product, they had pitched to a VC. So we had seed money, and so they had absolutely enough money to kind of build a team of engineers. So they pretty quickly got to the 20 engineers, and it was all about the platform. And quite frankly, it had to be about the platform based on the nature of that technology. And so they focused for the first, as I said, 2 years that I was supporting them, it was really focused on that. What we ended up doing, because we knew that we were going to need an enablement piece to being able to use the platform, we hired, that they had 1 sales lead, but they hired education people so that they could go in and train governments. And then about 2.5 years into this, the minute they landed their first pilot account, it was time to start to really think through the processes. And so we definitely leaned much, much more heavily on the technology because of the nature of what they were trying to solve for. And it's a pretty intuitive platform. So, so that was its leaning. The other folks, the LMS folks, it was a pretty, I'm not going to say simple platform, but it was a pretty standard sort of robust platform in terms of the type of platform that they had built. And so the operations piece of it and the scaling piece of it was what they went after, because it was a cumulative development process. And what I mean by that is they basically knew that if they could start a sort of a phase 1 of the product, they could continue to add content and curriculum to that over time. And so what they wanted to do is really quickly get to market to acquire some customers who would then inform what would be helpful in the platform. And so they went to operations really fast. So at 35 people, when I started to advise them, they were 35 people, they're about 450 now. They wanted me immediately to help them think about how do we create a go-to-market motion. And so I just sort of went into action to help Chris, their COO, think about these are all the things you need to be doing from a market segmentation perspective, et cetera, et cetera. So, so their approach was one that they could build on the platform, but they wanted to do this in parallel and just get to market, whilst the other platform really needed to be better than a sort of an MVP in order for it to be valuable, because it was really for earthquakes, etc. So you couldn't have sort of a half-pitch product. Mm-hmm. And so they spent more time. So it really depends on sort of the platform and what it is that you're sort of solving for out there.
Okay. I really like this next question that was asked because I think it's really applicable right now for us as we're looking for full-time and part-time or in internships.
Yeah.
So are there different things that early stage higher growth companies look for in candidates compared to big tech companies?
Yes, and I'll answer that through my personal lens of working alongside Aaron as a founder, and then 2 of the founders that I've advised. There is definitely an advantage to sort of strong business financial sort of lens on things. One of the things that so Aaron and one of my other founders looks for in MBA grads especially is folks that have had a combination of kind of dealing with sort of financial numbers, but taking being really strong on the financial side of this, but translating it sort of to strategy and then action. So Aaron's always looking for this. So for example, for his chief of staff, we have a really detailed JD for that role. And what we were looking for was someone that had very strong analytical skills, obviously good with the numbers, but strong analytical skills that could demonstrate how to take that analysis, translate it into something meaningful, and then pose a question, and make it sort of towards a recommendation. That was super important for Aaron and one of my other founders. And so I do think that this emphasis, I don't think I could overemphasize the importance of sort of sort of analytics as part of your thinking. And I personally leverage our analytics team for everything. It helps me think through the decisions that I have to make. The data never lies. You can manipulate it at times, but for the most part, like honestly, data doesn't really lie. Once you're cutting it 20 different ways, which we do, you know, I lean on my BA partner to tell me what they see and how they translate that into what we're trying to solve for. And so I do think that they're particularly important skills for startups, because what they're trying to do is find people that can tackle problems. Because in a really large organization, they're probably going to define the role a little more discreetly because there's so many players and there are so many people doing roles. In sort of even at our level, we're looking for really adaptable folks who can sort of provide context to us in different ways. And so I think having that skill set is probably pretty important.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We are actually 1 minute over. Sorry about that. I got
No, all good.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I know that everyone, really loved hearing all of your stories, advice, perspectives. I will send you a follow-up email because I know
Perfect.
that, I think everyone would appreciate those links. But again, thank you so much.
Thanks
and
for having me.
so much for speaking to us.
Loved it. Loved it. Thanks so much, everyone. Best of luck with your studies for the rest of the year. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.